Good morning and good Erev Shabbos. May Tashlumim, Kushat Yantiv of Shavuos, Mashal the Yantiv. So, holding Hilchis Sanhedrin, Perik Yud, we're going to discuss the first few halachas of Perik Yud. And that starts with halacha Aleph. The Rambam says one of the Dayonim, Din Nefashos, that was either favoring the defendant or accusing, prosecuting him. The reason that he's doing it is not because he really believes so, that he thinks it's so, but he's just following the others. He's following the group. He's over a lav. And it says, for that lav is Lesana al Riv Lintais. So we learn out that you shouldn't say, and Rambam's very careful with his lashon, Shleitomer b'shas minyan. You should not say during the time where they count. I'm going to be like this and this person. Or say what you think. What's what you or yourself are thinking. Halacha Beis, he has another point that this lav includes that the Malamed Chayiv, the Malamed Schus, the one who is favoring the defendant, should not be Malamed Chayiv. As it says, Lisana al Riv Lintais. And here he qualifies halacha. Although before he made a blanket statement, don't follow others. Here it's very interesting what he writes. It's during the when the arguments of the judges between themselves, where they deal with the issue and they come to some conclusion in halach. But during the rendering of the verdict, there we say differently. I'm sorry. Very interesting lashon. The one who had previously favored the defendant can now turn around and join the prosecution of the defendant and say the verdict is he is guilty. Okay. Just to note, the Ravid in the Minyan HaMitzvahs says, how could you therefore say it is forbidden to change your mind if it says clearly here you could change your mind? In other words, what's going on over here? First halacha and the second halacha seem to not fit. That is another couple of very interesting halachas which we need to analyze, and I believe that that's going to help us understand the first two halachas. If a student was came up with a favoring response to the defendant, and he died, one of the members, and he died in the middle. What's the halacha? It looks, we keep in our vision, we have him standing there and as if he's continuing to offer his opinion, which is a very, very, very big chiddush. How does that work? You need a bezdin. He's not alive. How is he part of the bezdin right now? Which is a question that's asked. It's not my own question. It's a question that's asked. The Chidush agrees. Brisker Rav asked this question. And he asks, his insight is a very, very important insight to this understanding these halachas. And then comes halacha dalet. We just said that a dead man speaks. What happens if a guy got up and said, I have a point of defense, and then he suffered a stroke and he couldn't continue speaking, or he died before he continued giving his defense, before he explained his defense on behalf of the defendant, and he didn't say why he wants to defend him. So the Rambam used a very interesting lashon harei zeh k'mishenes, as if he doesn't exist. The previous guy is alive and well, although he's dead, and this one is non-existent, although he was alive and well when he spoke. So obviously we need to understand the difference between them. So let's take a look at the sources just for the sake of understanding, because I think it'll give us some more of an insight, and we'll understand also what the issues of there are. So the first source is a very interesting source, the Mechilta Rab Shimon ben Yochai, in Parshat Mishpatim, Am Leisana Ariv Lintais. So he says, don't say during the minyan of the Rambam said, which will explain what that minyan is. It's enough that I will follow the opinion of Rabbi so-and-so, who's a great scholar, and I value his opinion. It's not just not out of the blue picking up, what the newspapers wrote. Some pundit came along and said, I have an opinion. A big chashuv rabbis from the big rabbis in the court, and he says so and so. No, say what you think. You need to offer your thoughts. Independent thinking. Okay, we will return to this a little later. Now let's take a look at those last two halachas about the dying people, and the last halacha when the person dies before being able to explain himself. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Mem Gimel, has this question. Rabbi Bar Huna asks Rosh what's the halacha in such a case? He said, I have defense, and then he couldn't continue. Rosh waved him off, and he said, if the guy didn't say anything, so you'll never be able to render a verdict. A guy, maybe there's somebody on the other side of the world that also has a defense. I mean, just because he said he had a defense, then maybe there's somebody in China who happens to will be able to come up with a defense for this person. And we never going to be able to render a verdict because of that. So the Gemara responds to Rav Sheshes, I don't understand. What's the comparison? Here the guy said he has a defense. The other guy never said anything. So the Gemara says, so what's the halacha? Right? Well, brings the Gemara, Rabbi Yisrael says the first halacha Gimel, that only after the guy actually stated his defense do we consider him here, and we look at him as if he is alive. Chai v'emed v'mkayme. The Gemara uses a little different lashon in the Rambam, not just mazakev v'mkayme, but chai v'emed v'mkayme, as if he's alive and he's standing in his place. But you see clearly only because he already explained his defense. So the Gemara says, not so posh. Not such a strong riot. Zicha pshitali, you're right. But I'm asking you if he wasn't Mizakim. That's double posh, but you don't have a proof of it. Yet, the Rambam takes this halacha as fact. Will kill a person based on a shaila in the Gemara, where the Gemara has not really concluded a verdict. So the Lechem Mishnah asked that question. The Gemara was matchid. The Gemara said it's not a proof. So he said, it's just a small, it's like a push away. You pushed it away, but it really is the conclusion of the Gemara. Now the question is, where did the Rambam see this? Why did he decide to kill a person based on a shaila in the Gemara, which is not clear? I mean, when it comes to dinei nefashos, you got to be machmir not to kill. Okay. So those are the issues that we have, the lashon of to join the mechayvim, which is a strange lashon the Rambam. Instead of saying if he changed his mind, no, he joins the mechayvim. And what's this harehu k'misha einoi, as if he's not here? Just say we don't accept his words, we don't listen to him. Was it's like he's not here? And what did Rav Sheshes think? When Rav Sheshes said, maybe there's a guy in China who might not like this, might have a defense. I mean, we don't know that there's a guy in China. There's a guy we know. He's there. He said that he has a defense. I mean, we trust people. They're not just, these are the people, the Talmidim sitting there who would sometimes come up with a defense. These were qualified people. These aren't just street people that you pick off you take off the street. These are people that are tried and tested and studied. And so how can you compare that to maybe there's somebody in China who has a defense? Okay, then we have the kasha that we asked. How can a dead person have an opinion? Or how can a dead person be involved in the verdict of a person? I mean, he's not alive. You need a bezdin. So this is a very key point in my opinion. Is the Brisker Rav says of art, and he basically opens up the concept of what goes on in bezdin, and he says that there are two parts to bezdin. There's bezdin that deals with halacha, iser v'heter. What's the dinim? What's the halachic aspect? I'd like to suggest that we find in the Torah Yeiru Mishpatecha Liyanker. There's a name of Hayra, teaching. Torah is teaching, giving direction, which is not specific to this case necessarily. It's as we know, when it comes to law, precedence is a very, very important thing. Jewish law is no different. In fact, no different. That's the source of where it comes from. The American law takes it off the historic reliance on precedents that you find in Jewish law. And the idea of precedents is you create hayra, you create, when Yankiv sent Yehuda to Mitzrayim, so it says, based Talmud, Rashi says, a place for hayra, teach, to develop the ideas of the Torah. So the Brisker says he doesn't say this part, but he just says that there's the part of bezdin that deals with hayra of every case. And then there's a second part, which deals with the verdict. What happens to this guy? So the Brisker wants to say that there's two separate concepts. There is the hayra concept, where a dead man's opinion counts. And where then there is the verdict. Of course, in the verdict, he doesn't count. There you need a different thing. So first they came to the halacha, and then they came to the gemar din, to the verdict. It needs understanding what exactly he's saying. Now, perhaps if we analyze the halachas of bezdin, we may be able to get a little bit of different picture, but basically on the same, based on the concept. There's an interesting halacha which we learned earlier on. I think it was the second day of Shavuos. We learned that wherever Sanhedrin reside, wherever there's a Sanhedrin, there has to be two court stenographers, reporters that sit and take down the information. And according to the Rambam, the way we paskin is that each one writes different things. One writes the opinion of the prosecution. One writes the opinion of the defense. Rashi has a different opinion than how do we do it, and there's a Shaila in the Gemara, Machlekes. I don't want to get into the details, but the Rabbi Yehuda holds you have three court writers, court reporters. One, whatever they're called, I don't know exactly their position, but one writes the opinion of the prosecution, one writes the opinion of the defense, and one writes both. Rashi says in order to avoid mistakes later. However, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos writes that the reason for Rabbi Yehuda is that there should be two witnesses for the prosecution and 2 witnesses for the defense. So therefore, the guy who writes the defense and the guy who writes both is a witness for either for the defense. The guy who writes the prosecution, the guy who writes both is a witness for the prosecution. However, Allah is like the Chachamim, that we don't need that. So what comes out is an interesting thing. According to Rashi, it's all done to avoid mistakes. It's a safeguard. And the machlek is whether it's 2 or 1 is what's the best way to avoid mistakes. According to Rambam, Rabbi Yehuda says you need witnesses on their testimony, on their reasoning. Chachamim say we don't need witnesses. But perhaps the fact that the Rambam explains that there's a concept according to Rabbi Yehuda that even that Chachamim don't hold it at, it's not because they hold that you don't need that. You need to know the reason from witnesses. And perhaps that indicates that the reasoning is a essential part of the process. You need to have that reasoning for the process. In other words, you can't come to a verdict without having been able to analyze the case and come to a reasoning. Another interesting Rambam, Rambam Perik writes, I think Perik Yudbeis, that we study all night. After they've heard the case, the 23 judges break out, and each one takes either a chavrusa or by himself, and they analyze and they discuss and they get into it all night long. In the morning, they wake up to Bezdin, or they rush to Bezdin, or they go to Bezdin, and they have an interesting expression. The one who's defending the defendant says, "I am the defender and I stand in my place." And the prosecutor says, "I am the prosecutor, I stand in my place." And if they make a mistake, the Rabbi Moshe says, they're reminded by the court, the Rambam uses an interesting lashon. Harei seifrei hadayanim maskir naisa. Harei kaisu, because they write. You know, it sounds like it's a byproduct of their writing, not the real main reason for their writing. And then the Rambam has a very interesting expression. Umaschilim bedinei. Then they start as din. So first they go through each one. What is your opinion? My opinion is this, and I stand by my idea, my thought. And I am still in. And then we count. Then we see, after we go through the din, more people prosecuting. Prosecutor, he's guilty. If not, no. Now the Gemara has very different expressions. The Gemara says, they come to Bezdin, Tov b'dov shnei sefer they are maskir naisa. Imas chuz v'lav aim dem leminyan, not maschilum b'dinay. Aim dem leminyan. It's a different expression. Now we go count. So the Rambam's maschilum b'dinay sounds like the din didn't start till now. Now starts the din. And it seems like the main aspect of the Sefer Dayanim was not just to remind them, it's to have to understand and to know the rules. And also, what's that mezakan even mekaymi? There's a lot of discussion about that. What does that mean? I stand by my thoughts. So perhaps we can say that the Rambam's opinion is, as we said before, the logic, the prelude to the psak is the hira. I need to go through a process of analyzing and thinking through this thing. And I can come to a conclusion of chiyuv. And I have to stand by it. And if I come to a conclusion of chiyuv, I could change my mind and come back the next day and say I have a different opinion. I've changed my mind. And we have to know that you changed your mind, because we got to start now talking about it and discussing it again. If he said that he favored the defendant, he can't change his mind. now in the deliberation in the Hayra'ah. Okay, so if that's the case, then there are, so again, what comes out like this is two things. A, as the Brisker said, it's two separate parts of Bezdin, the Hayra'ah and the Psak Din. However, what we're adding to that is that it's separate, but it is a necessary process in order to get to the Psak Din. What does that mean? That the Torah requires you to deep and delve into the logic behind it and come up with some kind of an understanding what you believe is the right explanation. What is the right approach in thought? An approach in thought. And that is where we get the Hayra'ah part. So Rav Sheshes comes along and says, if you don't have an opinion, you're not dear. Rav Sheshes says you're like a person in China. Without an opinion, saying I believe means nothing. And it's not an opinion, and therefore as if you never said anything. And that's the Lashon HaMaharei Kemisha Einai. Without an opinion, you're not there. And the Rambam Paskins like Rav Sheshes, who made Uberush Rawei, and he doesn't know it's a Tchiyah B'alma because of that, because Rav Sheshes just made nothing of it. The Gemara answer that's because the Gemara didn't really get into what's the relationship between the opinion and the verdict. You need an opinion. Without that, you're not a dayan. That's this decision. The what makes you a judge in the subject, in the matter, is your thought process. Then you can come to a conclusion. And that's possibly the meaning. I stand by what I said earlier. I am favoring the person umezaka anibim kaimi or mechayev anibim kaimi. You need to have the reasoning. If not, you have to discuss it again. You have to get back in, and that's where that's one of the possibly the main reason why you need to savor the Adam to know, is he standing, did he say differently before or not? And then starts the din. Umaschilim bedinai. Now that's a new phase. We've gone through the Hayra'ah, now goes the din. And that's why the Rambam doesn't write just oindim leminyan, umaschilim bedinai. Now we start the din. And that fits with what we mentioned from the Brisker up. It's two separate parts. So the only thing worth adding is that it's separate but necessary to get to part B. Part A is a necessary point in order to get to part B. I don't think he disagrees with that. It's just that he's not getting into that. But that answers the Ravid's question. What was the Ravid's question? How could you say it's also to change your mind when you're allowed to change your mind by the guy? There's two separate parts, and this part you can. That part you could. It's not just a earlier or later. It's a separate aspect of what's going on here. And therefore, you are not allowed to change in the Hayra'ah aspect. You can't change your mind. You need to have, once you said one way, once you said zchus, that concept needs to stay. What you thought of has to remain. Can't be negated. In other words, the zchus that you gave for the person has to enter into the deliberation. That has to be in the deliberation. Deliberation has to be all of the possible opinions of schus, and then the opinions of chayv can be changed. We're not interested in keeping them, but the opinions of schus must stay and must be in the deliberations. And sure, at the end, we'll see what happens. And that's what the Rambam says. If a person doesn't remember what he says, of course you have here something to give them to jolt their memory. But that's just part of it. The main thing is that now we have Hayra'ah. We have written down what's the thought processes and what are the reasons that we would be able to help this defendant and possibly others in the future. That's what Bezdin writes. Okay, now let's go to the verdict. So on the contrary, the fact that you can't change your opinion in the Hayra'ah process that tells you how important it is. It tells you that that is a mainstay in the process. And let's take a look at the Mechilta Rabbi Moshe Perlstein. He says, don't say I'm going to think. I hear a thought from this and this guy. It makes sense what he's saying. I want to follow what he says. No, you need to think on your own. Why? I like what he says. And the answer is because that's not Bezdin. Bezdin needs to deliberate. And you're not deliberating. You're just accepting somebody else's thoughts. Even though I like what he says, it sounds good to me. It's not like you're not picking up some article in a newspaper. You're going by a intelligent, brilliant man who has presented a thought, and well, I like that. I want to follow like him. I like that idea. The answer is no. You need to think on your own. You have to present. You have to harv in it. You have to get through the idea and see what you come to on your own. And that Hayra'ah is the preface to be able to be a dayan and get into the psak. Now, that's in the process of Hayra'ah. And again, it's a necessity. Exactly why and how, we can discuss that, but that's not our goal over here. However, in the din itself, the Rambam says, if I come down to giving a verdict, and I happen to think, I had a pretty good svara, but I like what the other guy is saying, and I want to follow what he says because I trust that he's thinking correctly. I have a right to do that because when it comes to the verdict, I got to say what I really think. This is not for that we have a Hayra'ah. This is not about the thought process. Now it's about what's right or wrong. And here I can decide that I want to follow with another opinion. There's no Amar Mashal Lefanecha anymore. I have a right to say I like the opinion of this and this person. Since this is a second stage, a total second stage. And if he likes something that he says that, this other guy is saying is acceptable to me, and I would rather feel more comfortable paskening like him, he has a right to do that. And that's in the Gemara Din, that's in the verdict stage of what's going on here. So according to this, it comes out very good. In the Hayra'ah process, a person who died, but he had a logic and he had a thought process, that thought process is there. It's been recorded. It's live. That's why it's as if he's standing. That's what the Sefer Dayanim have done. They have created a thought and put it in writing. So you have the Sefer Dayanim who stand in his place and say, he's here. That's why that guy's looked at it. He's alive. He's here. Comes to the verdict, of course he's not here. Can't do it. He's not alive. He can't be in the verdict. At that point, his words are not relevant. But in the Hayra'ah, for now and for future, it's there. And in that process, to influence the thoughts of others as it comes down to the verdict, it's there. And you never know who it will influence. As we said, he can change his mind and go with other points of view. And definitely the Mechayev can go on the point of the Mezakeh. So that still remains. That remains. The thought is there. We got to keep that thought. That's why it remains. If a guy doesn't have a thought, he never enters into the discussion. He's not a dayan. He's not here. A dayan requires to analyze and think through and come up with an opinion that makes sense. However, his verdict, his final decision does not have to rely only on himself. He can rely on the fact that he has others who he respects and values their opinion and hears what they say, even though he thinks a little differently, but he says, I really, really feel more comfortable with the other person that he has every right to do. And that's what the Rambam is teaching us. And that's why in the Hira process, which is relevant and necessary and required, you are not allowed to change your mind, because that zakai has to remain, that thought process has to remain. And yes, it may influence others when it comes to the psak. If it wouldn't influence others, who cares if he changes his mind? If everybody is stuck in their ways, who cares? No, he's going to be able to change the opinion of the person who was mechayiv or the person mezakeh when it comes down to it. And we want all those opinions in place and coming down to the verdict. It should all be there and all have been stated, repeated, and stated finally, and then come to the verdict and count out mechayivim and the mezakim, and that's the way we render the verdict. That's the way Bezin works, perhaps, and definitely fits to a lot of things. Everybody should have a good Shabbos, a good freilichen Shabbos. It should be a Shabbos that has in it the aspect of Kabbalah Satira, and since we're still connected to Kabbalah Satira, it should be B'simcha U'Pnimius, Hatzlacha Rabim V'Flag, everybody.